Hey guys, tonight we are forging the harvest. The soldier carries a sword, but the farmer carries the scythe. We are joining the medieval scythe maker. We are going to hammer steel until it is thin enough to slice the wind. This is a story about curves, rhythm, and the food that sustains us. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, hear the ring of the peening hammer, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The village wakes slowly. The mist clings to the valley floor like a blanket that refuses to let go. It pools in the low places, thick and white, and it wraps itself around the base of every building, every tree, every fence post. The sun is somewhere beyond the eastern hills, not yet committed to the day, and the world exists in that strange in-between time when color has not fully returned. Everything is gray and silver and the pale blue of morning shadows. But the forge is already awake. The forge is always the first to wake. Before the baker, before the priest, before the roosters have fully committed to their chorus, the scythe maker is standing at his anvil. Because harvest waits for no man, and the grass grows whether you are ready or not. The farmers need their tools, and the scythe maker needs the coolness of morning to work in, before the day's heat joins the heat of his fire and makes the shop unbearable. The workshop is a long, low building of stone and timber. The walls are thick because they need to hold the heat in winter and keep it manageable in summer. The roof is clay tiles, carefully arranged so that sparks will not find purchase and burn the village down. There is a wide door that stands open now, letting in what little light the grey morning offers. The floor is hard-packed earth, stained dark with decades of scale and coal dust and quenching water. In the center of the room stands the anvil, 200 pounds of iron on a massive oak stump, buried 3 feet into the ground so it will not shift, will not move, will not betray the maker when he needs it most. To the left of the anvil is the forge itself, built of fire brick and clay, a deep bowl where the coal burns and the air from the bellows below makes it burn hotter, much hotter. Hot enough to make iron plastic, to make steel flow like honey, to make the metal forget its hardness and remember only that it wants to be shaped. The bellows are leather and wood, operated by a long wooden lever that the scythe maker pumps with his foot, while his hands remain free for the tongs and the hammer. The scythe maker is not young. His beard is shot through with grey, his hands are scarred with 100 small burns and cuts, and his back carries the memory of 40 years of bending over the anvil. But his arms are still strong, his eyes are still sharp, and his knowledge is deeper than the village well. He has made thousands of scythes. He has made them for his father's customers, and now he makes them for their children. He knows the weight of every hammer, the color of every heat, the sound of good steel versus bad. This morning he is beginning a new scythe, not just any scythe, a scythe for the miller's eldest son, who is taking over a new field on the north side of the river. The young man came yesterday with coins in his hand and hope in his eyes. He needs a good blade, a blade that will last, a blade that will make the work easier instead of harder. The scythe maker accepted the commission with a nod, took the coins, and promised the blade would be ready in 3 days. 3 days to make a scythe. It sounds like enough time. It is barely enough time. A scythe is not a sword. People think they are similar because both are blades, both are steel, both are forged in fire and shaped on an anvil. But this is where the similarity ends. A sword is thick. A sword needs mass. A sword is designed to be strong enough to hit armor, to block other swords, to survive the chaos of battle where anything can happen. A swordsmith makes the blade thick through the spine, tapers it toward the edge, but keeps weight in the metal. Weight is strength. Weight is survival. A scythe is the opposite. A scythe must be thin. Thin enough that when you swing it through the grass does not even know the blade is coming until it is already cut. Thin enough that the weight of the blade itself does not tire the farmer before the day is half done. Thin enough to flex and spring and glide over the uneven ground without catching on every stone and root. But it must also be hard, hard enough to hold an edge through acres of cutting. hard enough that the silica in the grass stems does not dull it after 20 strokes. Thin and hard. These two things do not naturally go together. Thin things break, hard things shatter. The scythe maker's entire craft is finding the balance between these two opposites, forging them into a single piece of steel that will somehow be both and neither. He begins with the billet. The billet is not a single piece of metal. It cannot be. If he used only soft iron, the blade would be tough and flexible but would not hold an edge. If he used only steel, the blade would be hard and sharp but would crack at the first impact, the first stone hidden in the grass, the first twist of the wooden handle. So he makes a sandwich, a marriage of two metals, a lamination. On the workbench beside the forge, he has prepared two bars. One is iron, soft and grey, forged from the bloom that came from the ore the charcoal burners brought down from the hills. It has been worked and reworked, folded and welded, refined until the slag is gone, and what remains is clean, pure, malleable iron. This will be the body of the scythe, the core, the spine. This is what will give the blade its flexibility, its ability to bend and spring back, its resistance to breaking. The other bar is steel, smaller, denser, darker. It came from the old church bell that cracked last winter, melted down and refined, carburized with bone and charcoal until it became something new. Steel is iron that has drunk carbon, iron that has changed, iron that has become harder and less forgiving. This will be the edge of the scythe, the cutting surface, the part that must hold its sharpness through 10,000 strokes. The scythe maker takes the iron bar first. It is about 18 inches long, 2 inches wide, half an inch thick. It is cold and heavy in his hand. He places it in the forge, settling it into the bed of burning coal, and begins to pump the bellows. The leather lungs wheeze and sigh, and the coal begins to glow. First a deep red, then orange, then yellow. The heat rises. The air above the forge shimmers and dances. He watches the iron. Watching the metal is half the craft. You cannot rely on time. You cannot rely on the color of the fire. You must watch the metal itself, read its color, understand what it is telling you. The iron begins to glow, first a dull cherry red that is barely visible in the grey morning light. He keeps pumping. The red brightens, becomes more orange. Still he waits. The metal must be hot enough to weld, hot enough that two pieces will become one, but not so hot that it burns, not so hot that it throws sparks and loses its substance to the fire. There, a bright yellow-orange, almost painful to look at directly. He pulls the iron from the fire with long tongs, carries it to the anvil and sets it down. Then, moving quickly because the heat does not wait, he takes the steel bar, smaller and darker, and places it on top of the iron. The two metals touch. The steel bar is cold, and where it meets the glowing iron, the iron's heat begins to flow into it, but not fast enough. He needs them both hot. He needs them both welding temperature. He takes both pieces, now stacked, and returns them to the forge. More pumping of the bellows, more watching. The iron is already hot, so it reaches welding temperature first, and then the steel begins to catch up, its surface beginning to glow, red then orange then yellow. The scythe maker watches the steel carefully. Steel is less forgiving than iron. It can burn more easily. It can throw sparks and lose carbon and become weak. But he has done this 1,000 times. He knows the moment. When both pieces are glowing that perfect yellow-orange, radiating heat like small suns, he pulls them from the fire and brings them to the anvil. He takes his hammer, a 4-pound forging hammer with a slightly rounded face, and he begins to strike. Not hard, not yet. The first blows are gentle, setting the pieces together, letting them know they are about to become one. He strikes along the edge where the two pieces meet, tap, 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 then along the other edge, tap, tap, tap. The steel settles onto the iron. The heat bonds them. Now he strikes harder. The hammer rings against the glowing metal, a clear, pure note that echoes off the stone walls. Clang, clang, clang. Each blow compresses the two pieces together, forces the oxide layer to squeeze out from between them, creates a weld that is stronger than either piece alone. The scythe maker works in a rhythm, hitting the center, then working toward the edges, then back to the center. He rotates the piece, flips it, returns it to the fire when the yellow fades to orange, heats it again, brings it back to the anvil, and continues hammering. The layering continues. After the first welding pass, he returns the billet to the fire and lets it soak in the heat. This is the process that smiths call lamination, though they do not use such fancy words. They simply say they are making a sandwich, or they say they are plating the blade. The idea is simple, but the execution is delicate. The iron forms the body, the flesh of the blade. The steel forms the skin, the surface, the edge. When the scythe is finished, the steel will be so thin that you can barely see it, but it will be there, a hardened layer that does the actual cutting while the iron beneath supports it and keeps it from breaking. The welding continues. Heat, hammer, heat, hammer. The rhythm is hypnotic. The sound of the hammer on the anvil is not a chaotic banging, but a measured cadence, almost musical. Every smith develops their own rhythm, their own pace. Too fast and the work is sloppy. Too slow and the metal cools too much between blows. The scythe maker's rhythm is steady, practiced, automatic. His mind is free to think about the shape that is emerging, the balance of the metals, the thousand small decisions that will determine whether this blade is merely adequate or truly excellent. As he hammers, the billet lengthens. This is the nature of forging. When you compress metal in one direction, it must flow somewhere else. It cannot simply disappear. So as the hammer drives down, the metal spreads out, lengthens, widens. What began as two small bars is becoming a single longer bar. The iron and steel are now inseparable, married by fire and force into a single piece. But the billet is still thick, still heavy, still more like a sword than a scythe. This is where the real work begins. This is where the scythe maker must transform this blocky, stubborn chunk of metal into something thin and graceful and deadly. This is the plating. He returns the billet to the forge, but this time he is preparing for a different kind of work. The welding is done. The metals are joined. Now he must make this thick billet into a thin blade, and this is perhaps the most difficult part of the entire process. Because a scythe blade is not just thin, it is impossibly thin. Thin as a coin, but 3 feet long. Thin enough to flex in your hands, but strong enough to cut through a summer's worth of hay. If you try to make something this thin all at once, it will not work. The metal will crack. The temperature will be uneven. The shape will be wrong. So the scythe maker works gradually, extending the billet in stages, keeping the temperature consistent, maintaining control over the metal at every step. The billet goes back into the fire. The coals hiss and glow. The bellows wheeze. The metal climbs back through the colors, red to orange to yellow. When it is ready, he brings it to the anvil and begins to hammer it flat. But not with the same hammer he used for welding. That hammer was heavy, designed to compress and join. Now he needs a different tool. He switches to a flatter, lighter hammer, maybe 2.5 pounds, with a face that is broader and less rounded. This hammer is designed to spread metal, to push it outward rather than simply compress it downward. He lays the billet flat on the anvil and begins to strike it, working from the center outward toward the edges. Each blow pushes the metal a little wider, a little thinner. The rhythm changes slightly. The blows are faster now, lighter, more like a drum beat than a bell toll. Clang, 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 clang. Pause, return to the fire. Heat, return to the anvil. Clang, 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 clang. The metal spreads. What was 2 inches wide becomes 3 inches wide. Then 4. The thickness decreases proportionally. What was half an inch thick becomes 3/8 of an inch, then a 1/4 inch. But it is still not thin enough, not even close. The scythe maker wipes his brow. The morning mist has burned away now, and the sun is climbing, and the heat from the forge is beginning to make the shop stifling. But there is no time to rest. The metal does not care if you are tired. The metal does not care if your shoulder aches or your lungs burn from breathing coal smoke. The metal only cares that you keep it at the right temperature and hit it in the right places with the right amount of force. He adjusts the billet, rotating it so he can work on a different section. Scythe blades are long, and the anvil face is only so big, so he must work on one section at a time, gradually extending the metal, creating a piece that is much longer than the anvil itself. He heats the next section, brings it to the anvil, and continues hammering. The sound fills the valley. Farmers working in distant fields can hear it, a steady clanging that tells them the scythe maker is at work. Children in the village know that sound, have grown up with it, use it to mark the time of day. When the hammering starts, morning has begun. When it pauses, the smith is heating the metal. When it resumes, another section is being shaped. As the blade extends and thins, the scythe maker must be increasingly careful. Thin metal cools faster than thick metal. If he is not quick enough between the fire and the anvil, the metal will drop below working temperature and refuse to move properly under the hammer. Worse, it might crack. A crack in a scythe blade is a disaster. It cannot be welded back together, not really. The blade is too thin, too delicate for that kind of repair work. A cracked blade is a ruined blade. So he works faster but not carelessly, speed and precision together. He develops a routine. Pull from the fire, walk to the anvil, set the piece down, hammer for exactly 15 seconds, check the color, decide whether he can squeeze out a few more blows or whether the heat is fading too fast. If the heat is still good, hammer for another 10 seconds. If not, back to the fire. Never force cold metal. Never hit metal that has dropped below orange. That is how you get cracks. Hours pass. The billet is now recognizable as a blade, though it is still not finished. It is about 30 inches long, 4 inches wide at its widest point, and perhaps an eighth of an inch thick. The steel layer is still bonded to the iron core, though you cannot see the layers anymore. They are simply part of the same whole now, inseparable. But an eighth of an inch is still too thick. A scythe blade must be thinner, much thinner. Thin enough that when you hold it up to the light, you can almost see the light coming through. Thin enough that it rings when you tap it with your fingernail, a clear, high note like a bell. The scythe maker changes tools again. He sets aside the flatter hammer and picks up a smaller hammer, lighter still, with a very broad, flat face. This is a planishing hammer, designed for the final flattening, the final thinning. He also takes a flat iron plate and places it on the anvil face. The plate is smooth and slightly oiled. This will prevent the thin blade from sticking to the anvil and will help create a more even surface. Back to the fire. The blade is so long now that only part of it will fit in the forge at one time, so he must heat it in sections. He heats the first foot of the blade, the part that will eventually become the tip, and brings it to the anvil. With the planishing hammer, he begins to work the metal thinner still. The blows are rapid now, very light, almost delicate. Tap, 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 tap. The sound is different, higher pitched, faster. The metal spreads under these light blows, becoming thinner and wider with each pass. He must be very careful now. At this thickness, the metal is fragile. Hit it too hard and it will crack. Let it cool too much and it will work harden and resist the hammer. He must maintain perfect temperature control, perfect hammer control, perfect rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Back to the fire. Heat the next section. Tap, 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 tap. The blade is becoming a thing of grace now, no longer a chunky billet, but a true blade, thin and flexible and dangerous. When he has worked the entire length of the blade to the right thickness, he pauses to examine it. He holds it up to the morning light that streams through the open door. The blade is now about 3 feet long, perhaps 5 inches at its widest point, and thin enough that it flexes under its own weight when he holds it horizontally. The surface is grey and covered with scale, the black iron oxide that forms whenever hot iron meets air. But beneath the scale, he knows, is good metal. The iron and steel lamination is complete. The blade is thin and strong and ready for the next step. But before he can move on, he must clean the scale away. He takes the blade to the quenching trough, a long wooden box filled with water, and plunges the hot metal into it. The water erupts into violent boiling, steam hissing and roaring, filling the shop with a cloud of vapor. The sudden cooling causes the scale to crack and flake away from the surface. When he pulls the blade out, much of the scale comes with it, leaving the metal beneath cleaner, grayer, ready to work further. Now comes the curve. This is what separates a scythe from every other blade. A sword is straight, a knife is straight, an axe is straight, but a scythe is curved. Not just curved, but compound curved, bent in two different planes at once, a shape that seems almost impossible to create from a single piece of metal. The curve serves a purpose. Several purposes, in fact. The first is practical. A curved blade is longer than a straight blade of the same width, which means more cutting edge, which means more grass cut with each stroke. The second is mechanical. The curve allows the blade to be swung in a natural arc, following the motion of the farmer's arms and body, making the work less tiring. The third is functional. The curve allows the blade to glide over the surface of the ground rather than digging into it, cutting the grass at its base without catching on every irregularity in the earth. But creating this curve is not simple. The scythe maker cannot simply bend the blade while it is hot. Well, he can, but that is only part of the process, because a scythe blade is not curved in just one direction. It curves backward, yes, like a crescent moon, but it also twists, the cutting edge angled downward relative to the back of the blade, creating what smiths call a compound curve or a helical curve. This twist is what allows the blade to slice at the correct angle, what gives it its characteristic cutting action. To create this curve, the scythe maker uses the bick, the horn of the anvil. The bick is the rounded, tapered projection that extends from the main body of the anvil, designed specifically for bending and shaping curves. It is made of the same hard iron as the rest of the anvil, polished smooth from years of use. He returns the blade to the forge, heating the first section that will form the beginning of the curve. When the metal is orange hot, he brings it to the anvil and lays it across the bick so that the blade drapes over the horn. Then, with his hammer, he begins to tap the top surface of the blade, working along its length. Each blow compresses the top surface of the metal while the bottom surface, pressed against the curve of the bick, remains the same length. This differential compression causes the blade to bend, to follow the curve of the horn. Tap, 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 tap. The blade begins to arc. He rotates the piece, works on another section, tapping carefully, watching the curve develop. Too much hammering in one spot, and the curve will be uneven, kinked rather than smooth. Too little, and the blade will remain stubbornly straight. He heats and hammers, heats and hammers. Gradually, the blade takes on the classic scythe shape, curving backward like a crescent moon. But he is not done. Now comes the twist, the compound curve that is the true mark of a master scythe maker. To create the twist, he must heat the blade and manipulate it while it is still hot, but not too hot. If the metal is yellow hot, it will be too soft and the twist will be uneven. If it is red hot, it will be too stiff and might crack. He needs it orange, that perfect middle temperature where steel is plastic, but still has some memory, some resistance. He heats a section of the blade and brings it back to the anvil. This time, instead of using the bick, he lays the blade flat on the anvil face and uses a twisting wrench, a simple tool made of iron with two arms that can grip the blade at different points. He clamps the wrench onto the blade and with careful, steady pressure begins to twist. The metal resists, then yields, rotating along its length. The cutting edge begins to angle downward, creating the compound curve. This is delicate work. Twist too much and the blade will be difficult to use, the angle wrong, the cutting action awkward. Twist too little and the blade will not cut efficiently. The scythe maker relies on experience here, on the memory of 1,000 other scythes, on the feel of the metal in his hands. He twists, checks the angle, heats another section, twists again. Slowly, across multiple heating cycles and many careful adjustments, the blade takes on its final curve. It sweeps backward in a graceful crescent, and it twists along its length so that the cutting edge drops down and forward, creating a shape that is beautiful and functional and uniquely suited to its purpose. But there is one more critical element to add. The blade is now curved and twisted and thin, but it is also weak. Too weak. A piece of metal this thin, curved in two directions, will flap and flex and vibrate when it is swung through the grass. It needs stiffness. It needs a spine. It needs what scythe makers call the rib or the back. The back of a scythe blade is thicker than the rest of the blade. Much thicker. If the cutting edge is thin as a coin, the back is thick as a finger. This thick section runs along the top edge of the blade, the edge opposite the cutting edge, and it serves as a structural member, a reinforcement that keeps the thin blade from bending and twisting under the stress of use. Creating the rib is a matter of selective forging. The scythe maker must thicken the back edge without thickening the cutting edge. This means he must work carefully, hammering in specific places and avoiding others. He starts by heating the back edge of the blade, just that section, keeping the cutting edge cooler. This is easier now because the blade is long and he can position it in the forge so that only the back edge is in the hottest part of the fire. When the back edge is glowing orange, he brings the blade to the anvil and positions it so that the cutting edge hangs over the side of the anvil, unsupported. Then he hammers the back edge, using a hammer with a slightly rounded face. Each blow drives into the hot metal, compressing it, thickening it. But because the cutting edge is unsupported, hanging in the air, it does not receive the impact of the hammer. The force is absorbed entirely by the back edge. Clang. The metal thickens. Clang. It builds up, becoming more robust. Clang. The rib begins to form. He works along the entire length of the back edge, heating and hammering, heating and hammering. The rib grows, a thick spine of metal that stands proud above the rest of the blade. When he is finished, the back edge is perhaps a quarter-inch thick, maybe more, while the cutting edge remains thin and delicate. The contrast is dramatic. Run your finger along the blade, and you can feel the transition from thin to thick, from flexible to rigid. This is the engineering of the scythe, the structural design that allows a blade to be both thin enough to cut efficiently and strong enough to survive years of use. The scythe maker examines his work. The blade is curved, twisted, thinned, and reinforced. It is almost finished, but it is still rough, still covered in hammer marks and scale and irregularities. It needs to be cleaned, smoothed, prepared for the final stages of heat treatment and sharpening. This work will come tomorrow. For now, the heaviest forging is done. He sets the blade aside on the workbench and steps outside. The sun is high now, well past noon, and the village is fully awake. He can hear the sounds of daily life, children playing, chickens clucking, someone chopping wood in the distance. His back aches from hours of bending over the anvil. His arms are tired from swinging the hammer. His lungs are thick with coal smoke, but the work is progressing. The blade is taking shape. In his mind, he can already see it finished, attached to a wooden handle, singing through the grass in the miller's son's hands. But there is still much to do. The blade must be filed smooth. It must be hardened in fire and water. It must be tempered to the perfect hardness. It must be sharpened to an edge so fine that it will split a hair. All of this work awaits. But for now, in this moment, the scythe maker allows himself a brief rest. He drinks from the water bucket. He sits on the bench outside his shop. He lets the ache in his muscles settle into a dull background throb. Tomorrow he will return to the anvil. Tomorrow he will continue transforming this rough blade into a finished scythe. But today the foundation is laid. The metal has been laminated, plated, curved, and ribbed. The blade exists, suspended between its raw beginning and its refined end, waiting for the maker's hands to carry it forward. The next morning, the scythe maker returns to the blade. It has rested overnight, cooling completely, returning to its natural state. The metal is grey and mottled, covered in the residue of the forge, hammer marks visible along its surface like the footprints of the work that shaped it. He picks it up carefully, feeling its weight, testing its flex. The blade bends when he applies pressure, springs back when he releases. Good. The lamination has held. The curve is true. The rib is strong. But the blade is still soft. Not as soft as pure iron, because of the steel layer on the surface, but soft enough that it will not hold an edge. Soft enough that the first day of mowing would dull it beyond use. The metal needs to be transformed one more time, taken through fire and water, changed at the level of its invisible structure. It needs to be hardened. Hardening is perhaps the most dangerous step in the entire process. Up until now, every operation has been reversible. If the curve was wrong, he could heat the blade and adjust it. If the rib was uneven, he could hammer it smooth. But hardening is final. Once the blade is quenched, once the steel structure is locked into place, there is no going back. If something goes wrong during the quench, if the blade cracks or warps or develops soft spots, the entire piece is ruined. Days of work lost in a single moment. So the scythe maker prepares carefully. He clears the area around the quenching trough, making sure there is nothing to trip over, nothing to interfere with the quick movement from forge to water. He checks the trough itself, a long wooden box lined with metal, filled with oil instead of water. Oil for a scythe blade. Water is too harsh, too violent. Water would cool the thin blade too quickly, create too much stress, cause it to crack or warp beyond use. Oil is gentler, cooler, more forgiving. It still hardens the steel, but it does so more gradually, giving the metal time to adjust to its new state. The oil in the trough is dark and viscous, animal fat rendered and refined, mixed with a little beeswax to adjust its properties. The scythe maker has used this same batch of oil for months, adding to it when the level gets low, skimming off the char and debris that accumulates on the surface. The oil smells heavy and organic, not unpleasant but distinct, a smell that clings to everything in the shop. He builds up the fire in the forge, adding fresh coal, pumping the bellows until the bed of coals glows yellow-white. This needs to be hot, hotter than forging temperature. The steel must be brought up to what smiths call critical temperature, the point at which the internal structure of the metal changes. The iron and carbon atoms rearrange themselves into a new configuration that, when rapidly cooled, will lock into a hard, brittle state. For steel, critical temperature is just below yellow heat, not the bright yellow of welding, but a duller, deeper yellow, the color of aged brass or old honey. Too cold and the steel will not harden properly. Too hot and the steel will grain coarsen, become weak, lose its strength. The scythe maker knows this color by heart. He has seen it thousands of times. His eyes can judge it in the darkness of the forge, in the bright light of midday, in the gray light of dawn. But there is a complication. The blade is 3 feet long. The forge is not. He cannot heat the entire blade at once. So he must work in sections, hardening the blade incrementally, moving carefully to ensure that each section receives the same treatment, the same temperature, the same quench. He starts with the cutting edge, the business end of the scythe, the part that will do the actual work. He lays the blade across the forge so that the first foot of the cutting edge is buried in the coals. The rib, the thick back edge, hangs outside the forge, staying cooler. This is intentional. The rib does not need to be as hard as the cutting edge. In fact, it should not be as hard. If the entire blade is hardened to the same degree, it will be too brittle, too prone to breaking. The rib should remain somewhat softer, more flexible, able to absorb shocks and stresses. Only the cutting edge needs to be glass hard. He pumps the bellows slowly, watching the metal begin to glow. Red first, then orange, climbing through the spectrum. The blade, being thin, heats quickly. Too quickly. He must be careful not to overshoot the temperature. He adjusts the air flow, reducing the draft, letting the heat build more gradually. The color climbs, orange to yellow, light yellow to deeper yellow. He watches the cutting edge carefully, looking for that perfect brass honey color. The metal seems to glow from within, radiating heat, shimmering, almost there, almost there. He grabs the blade with his long tongs, lifting it from the forge in a single smooth motion. The blade is glowing, but it is also floppy, bending under its own weight like a ribbon of light. At this temperature, the steel has no rigidity. It is soft and plastic and would be easy to bend or reshape if he wanted to. But he does not want to reshape it. He wants to freeze it, lock it in place, transform it from soft to hard. He carries the glowing blade to the quenching trough, moving quickly but not frantically. 3 steps from forge to trough. He has walked this path so many times he could do it blind. He positions the blade over the oil, the glowing metal reflecting in the dark surface like a second blade below. Then, in one continuous motion, he plunges the blade edge first into the oil. The oil erupts. It does not boil the way water would, with violent steam and noise, but it seethes and hisses, the surface churning as the superheated metal meets the cooler liquid. The oil around the blade vaporizes instantly, creating a layer of gas between the metal and the liquid, and the blade settles into this gas layer, cooling rapidly, but not too rapidly. The scythe maker holds the blade steady, keeping it submerged, moving it gently back and forth to disturb the vapor layer and ensure even cooling. The glow fades from the metal, yellow to orange to red to a dull, barely visible red. Then even that fades, and the metal goes dark beneath the oil. The hissing subsides. The oil calms. The transformation is complete. The steel's structure has been locked into its hardened state, the carbon atoms trapped in the iron matrix in a configuration that creates incredible hardness, but also incredible brittleness. He pulls the blade from the oil, letting the excess liquid drip back into the trough. The metal is still warm, but no longer glowing. He can see the color change along the blade's length, the section that was in the oil now a darker gray than the section that remained outside the forge. He sets the blade down carefully and returns to the forge to heat the next section. This process repeats section by section along the entire length of the cutting edge. Heat, quench. Each section takes about 5 minutes from start to finish. The blade is 3 feet long. He works in 1-foot sections, 3 sections for the cutting edge. The rib he does not harden at all, leaving it in its softer, forged state. When the hardening is complete, he lifts the blade and flexes it gently. It resists. The blade is now much stiffer than before, the hardened steel refusing to bend easily. He taps it with his knuckle and it rings, a clear, high note that sustains for several seconds. Good. The hardening has taken. The steel is now hard enough to cut, hard enough to hold an edge. But it is also too brittle to use. If a farmer tried to mow with this blade right now, it would shatter at the first stone, the first hidden root. The steel is glass hard, and like glass, it will break rather than bend. It needs to be tempered, brought back down from this extreme hardness to a more moderate, more usable state. Tempering is done with heat, but much lower heat than hardening. The scythe maker builds a small fire of wood shavings and kindling outside the forge, just a little fire enough to create gentle warmth. He suspends the blade over this fire, letting the heat rise and warm the metal slowly, evenly. As the metal warms, its color changes. First, the gray-black of the quenched steel begins to lighten. A pale straw color appears, then deepens to yellow, then to bronze, then to purple, then to blue. These colors are called temper colors, and they indicate the temperature of the metal, and by extension, the degree of hardness being reduced. Straw yellow means the steel is still very hard. Bronze means it is moderately hard. Blue means it is relatively soft. For a scythe blade, the scythe maker wants the cutting edge to temper to a bronze color, which will leave it hard enough to hold an edge but tough enough to resist breaking. He watches the colors bloom and spread along the blade. When the bronze color reaches the cutting edge and extends about half an inch back from the edge, he removes the blade from the heat and lets it cool in air. The tempering is done. The steel is now in its final state, hard but not brittle, tough but not soft, balanced between the extremes. He tests the edge with his thumbnail. The steel is hard enough that his nail cannot scratch it. He flexes the blade again. It bends slightly but springs back, resilient and strong. Perfect. Now comes the sharpening. This is where the scythe diverges from almost every other cutting tool. A knife is sharpened by grinding. An axe is sharpened by grinding. A sword is sharpened by grinding. You take an abrasive stone and you remove metal from the edge, creating a thin, sharp bevel that cuts. But a scythe is not sharpened by grinding. A scythe is sharpened by peening. Peening is a cold hammering process. Instead of removing metal from the edge, the scythe maker moves it, compresses it, work hardens it, creating an edge that is thinner and harder than the rest of the blade. This edge will be sharper than any ground edge could be, and it will stay sharp longer because the cold working of the metal creates a surface layer that is extremely dense and resistant to wear. The tools for peening are simple but specialized. First, there is the peening hammer itself, a small hammer, maybe half a pound, with a narrow, slightly rounded face. The face is polished smooth, without any chips or scratches that might mar the blade. Second, there is the peening anvil, a small anvil, portable, designed to be taken into the field. It is perhaps 10 pounds, made of hardened steel, with a flat face and a narrow edge. The scythe maker sets this small anvil on his workbench, securing it with a leather strap so it will not move during the work. He sits on a low stool and lays the blade across his lap, the cutting edge facing away from him, accessible to his hammer. The blade is cold now, room temperature, the steel in its hardened and tempered state. He positions the first section of the cutting edge against the narrow edge of the peening anvil, holding the blade steady with his left hand, the hammer ready in his right. Then he begins to strike, not hard blows, light, rapid taps, ting. The hammer meets the edge, ting, and again, ting. Each blow compresses the metal slightly, pushing it forward, thinning it, extending it. The sound is high and bright, almost musical, like a tiny bell ringing over and over. Ting, 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 ting. The rhythm is fast, perhaps 3 or 4 blows per second, a continuous patter that sounds almost like rain on a tin roof. The scythe maker works along the edge, moving the blade incrementally, keeping the hammer blows consistent in force and placement. The edge is about 3 feet long. He is tapping perhaps a 1/4 inch of edge with each blow, moving the blade forward slightly after each strike. This means thousands of hammer blows, thousands of small compressions, thousands of tiny movements of metal. Ting, 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 ting. The sound fills the workshop. Outside, people walking past know what that sound means. The scythe maker is peening a blade. Someone will have a sharp tool soon. The farmers listen to that sound with a kind of satisfaction. A peened edge is a proper edge, the edge their fathers used and their grandfathers before them. The ting of the peening hammer is the sound of old knowledge, old skill, old ways that still work better than any new invention. As he works, the edge begins to change. It becomes thinner, more delicate, almost wire-like. The steel is being compressed, the grain structure being refined, the surface becoming denser and harder than the interior of the blade. This work hardening is what makes a peened edge superior. The edge is not just sharp because it is thin. It is sharp because it is hard, harder even than the tempered steel behind it, hard enough to cut tough grass, stems thousands of times without dulling. But peening is not just about creating sharpness. It is also about creating the right geometry. A scythe edge is not beveled like a knife edge. It is not V-shaped. Instead, it is almost flat, with just a very slight taper toward the cutting edge. This geometry reduces friction, allows the blade to slip through the grass rather than wedging into it. The peening process creates this geometry naturally as the hammer blows thin the edge without creating a steep bevel. The scythe maker pauses occasionally to examine his work. He runs his thumb lightly along the edge, feeling for burrs or irregularities. He holds the blade up to the light, looking along its length, checking that the edge is straight and even. Peening is both fast and slow. Each section takes only a minute or two of hammering, but the blade is long, and perfection requires patience. Ting, 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 ting. He continues. His arm moves in a steady rhythm, the hammer rising and falling, the sound never changing, never varying. This is meditative work. The mind can wander while the hands continue their practiced motion. He thinks about the miller's son, about the field that will be mowed, about the hay that will feed the animals through the winter. He thinks about the cycle of the seasons, the planting and the growing and the harvest and the rest. The scythe is part of this cycle. The scythe is the tool that closes the summer and opens the autumn. After perhaps an hour of continuous peening, he reaches the end of the blade. The entire edge has been work-hardened, compressed, refined. He sets down the hammer and examines the result. The edge is now so thin that it catches the light differently than the rest of the blade, almost translucent at the very edge. He tests it carefully with a piece of grass from outside, holding the stem against the edge and pulling gently. The grass separates with almost no resistance, sliced cleanly through. But the edge is not quite finished. Peening creates a rough edge, a burr of metal that extends beyond the true cutting surface. This burr must be removed. The scythe maker takes a whetstone, a fine-grained stone made of compressed sandstone, soaked in water. He draws the stone along the edge, gently, at a very shallow angle, removing the burr and polishing the peened surface. The stone hisses against the metal, a soft, wet sound. He works along the entire edge, then flips the blade and works the other side, ensuring that the burr is completely removed from both faces. When he is finished, the edge is complete. He tests it again, this time with a blade of grass held upright. He swings the scythe blade gently through the air, and the grass stem is cut before it can even bend, falling in two pieces. The edge is sharp, truly sharp, sharper than any edge could be without this patient, ancient process of cold hammering. The blade is done, but a blade without a handle is useless. The scythe maker sets the blade aside and turns his attention to the snath, the wooden handle that will allow a mower to wield this tool. A snath is not a straight stick. It is not even a simple curved stick. A snath is a carefully shaped piece of wood, ergonomically designed to fit the human body, to allow the mower to work for hours without excessive fatigue. The shape is complex, almost organic, like a piece of driftwood worn by water and time into just the right form. The scythe maker walks to his timber pile, where he has several saplings drying. He needs ash or willow, woods that are strong but flexible, woods that will bend without breaking, woods that will last for years of hard use. He selects an ash sapling, perhaps 6 feet long, straight for most of its length but with a natural curve at one end. The wood is green, recently cut, still holding moisture in its fibers. This is important. Dry wood will not bend. It will crack and splinter. But green wood, when heated, becomes plastic, moldable, willing to take on new shapes. He brings the sapling to his steaming box, a long wooden trough with a lid set over a small fire. Inside the box, water boils, creating steam that fills the enclosed space. He places the sapling inside the box and closes the lid. The steam surrounds the wood, heating it, softening the lignin that holds the wood fibers together, making the wood pliable. He lets it steam for an hour, maybe longer. When he opens the lid, the wood is hot to the touch, darkened with moisture, flexible. He pulls it from the box and carries it quickly to his bending jig, a wooden form set up on his workbench. The jig is a series of pegs and blocks arranged in the shape he wants the snath to take. The snath must curve in an S shape, gentle but distinct, with one curve at the top where the mower's hands will grip, and another curve lower down where the blade will attach. He fits the steamed wood into the jig, bending it around the pegs, forcing it into the curves. The wood resists but yields. He can feel it bending, can hear the fibers stretching but not breaking. When the wood is positioned correctly, he secures it with clamps and wedges, holding it firmly in the desired shape. Then he steps back and lets it cool. As the wood cools and dries, it will retain this new shape. The steam has made the bending possible, but the cooling makes it permanent. The wood's internal structure rearranges itself, accepts the curves as its new natural state. This will take time. Hours, maybe overnight. The scythe maker covers the jig with a cloth to slow the drying and prevent cracking, then returns to other work while the wood sets. The next morning he removes the snath from the jig. The wood has cooled completely, dried somewhat, and retained the curves beautifully. He flexes it gently, testing its strength. Good. No cracks, no splits, no weak points. The curves are smooth and even, flowing from one to the next like water. But the snath is still rough, covered in bark and irregularities. He takes a draw knife, a two-handled blade used for shaping wood, and begins to clean and smooth the surface. He strips away the bark, revealing the pale wood beneath. Then he shaves away the bumps and knots, creating a smooth, even surface. The snath must be comfortable to hold, free of splinters or rough spots that would tear at the mower's hands during hours of work. He also shapes two handles, called grips or nibs, that will be attached to the snath at specific points. These handles are short pieces of wood, shaped to fit comfortably in the hand, positioned so that the mower can grip the snath at the most efficient angles for swinging the blade. The placement of these handles is crucial. Too high and the mower will have to stoop. Too low and the blade will not swing properly. The scythe maker measures carefully, using his own body as a guide. He knows that most men are about the same height, give or take a few inches, and he has learned through experience where the handles should go for the best leverage and comfort. He drills holes through the snath at the marked points and inserts the handle grips, securing them with wooden pegs driven through cross holes. The grips extend perpendicular to the snath, one on the left side, one on the right, positioned so the mower's hands will be at different heights and different angles, allowing a natural, comfortable grip during the scything motion. With the snath complete, it is time for the final step, attaching the blade to the handle. This connection is made with an iron ring and wooden wedges, a system that is both secure and adjustable. The blade has a tang, a short projection at the heel where the rib extends beyond the cutting edge. This tang has a hole drilled through it. The snath has a corresponding slot cut into its end, sized to receive the tang. The scythe maker takes an iron ring, forged specifically for this purpose, roughly circular, but with a gap on one side. He fits the tang into the slot in the snath, then slips the ring over the end of the snath, encircling both the wood and the metal tang. The ring holds the blade in place, preventing it from pulling away from the handle during use. But the ring alone is not enough. The blade must be held at a specific angle relative to the snath, what mowers call the Tang Angle or the lie of the blade. This angle determines how the blade will cut. Too steep, and the blade will dig into the ground. Too shallow, and it will skate over the grass without cutting. The correct angle is about 30 degrees, enough that the blade cuts close to the ground, but does not catch on every irregularity. To achieve and maintain this angle, the scythe maker uses wedges. Thin pieces of hardwood, carefully shaped, driven between the tang and the snath, forcing the blade to tilt to the correct position. He taps the wedges into place with a small mallet, checking the angle by eye, adjusting until it looks right. When he is satisfied, he drives the wedges firmly home, locking the blade in position. The scythe is complete. The scythe maker lifts it, feeling its weight, testing its balance. The blade hangs from the curved snath, the cutting edge forward and down, ready to slice through standing grass. He grips the two handles and makes a slow practice swing, the motion natural and comfortable, the blade moving in a smooth arc parallel to the ground. The weight is good, the balance is good, the feel is good. He carries the scythe outside into the afternoon sun. There is a patch of tall grass growing behind his workshop, grass he has left unmowed for exactly this purpose. He positions himself at the edge of the grass, grips the handles, and begins to mow. The blade whispers through the grass. It does not hack or chop. It slices smooth and clean, the stems falling in a neat swath to his left. He takes another step, swings again. More grass falls. The motion is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Step, swing, step, swing. The grass sighs as it falls. The blade rings softly, a metallic whisper. The peened edge is doing its work, cutting without effort, without resistance. After a dozen swings, he stops and examines the cut grass. The stems are cleanly severed, not torn or crushed. The stubble left behind is even, about 2 inches tall. Perfect. He checks the edge of the blade. Still sharp, no nicks, no damage. He nods, satisfied. The miller's son will be pleased. The scythe maker carries the finished tool back into his workshop and wraps the blade carefully in old cloth to protect it until the miller's son comes to collect it. He sets it in the corner, leaning against the wall, the snath upright, the blade wrapped and safe. That evening, the sun begins its descent toward the western hills. The light changes, becoming golden and soft, stretching the shadows long across the valley. The scythe maker sits on the bench outside his shop, his day's work done, his body tired but his mind satisfied. Somewhere out there, in a field by the river, the miller's son is looking at the tall grass that will soon need cutting. The young man does not know it yet, but his scythe is ready, waiting for him, a tool that will make his work easier and his harvest more abundant. The finished scythe leans against the barn wall in the scythe maker's mind, though in reality it is still in his shop. But he can see it clearly, can imagine it there in the dawn light, ready for its first true work. The blade is thin and sharp and perfectly curved. The snath is smooth and strong and ergonomically shaped. The tang angle is correct. The balance is right. The edge is keen. Tomorrow the miller's son will come. He will pay the remainder of the price. He will heft the scythe, test its balance, make a few practice swings. His eyes will light up when he feels how well the tool fits his hands, how naturally it moves through the air. He will thank the scythe maker, promise to return when the blade needs repeening, as all blades eventually do. Then he will walk home, the scythe over his shoulder, already imagining the work ahead. But tonight the scythe rests. The blade is quiet, the steel at peace after its journey through fire and water and hammer blows. The workshop is dark and still. The forge has gone cold, the coals faded to grey ash. The anvil stands silent, no longer ringing with the impact of the hammer. The tools are put away, hung on their hooks, waiting for tomorrow's work. Outside, the stars begin to appear. The valley settles into its evening routine. Cooking fires send thin lines of smoke into the cooling air. Cattle low in their pens. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, then falls silent. The miller's wheel turns in the river, its slow grinding a constant background rhythm that the villagers no longer consciously hear, but would miss if it stopped. The uncut field waits. The grass stands tall and green, heavy with seed, ready for the harvest. When the miller's son arrives with his new scythe, the grass will fall in long, even rows. The field will be transformed from standing green to horizontal gold. The hay will be raked and dried and stacked and stored. The animals will be fed through the winter. The cycle will continue. But for now, the field stands unmowed. The grass sways gently in the evening breeze. The sun touches the hilltops and begins to slip below them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deepening blue. The day is ending. The work is done. The scythe is ready. And you are safe. The barn is secure. The animals are fed. The tools are sharp and waiting. The harvest will come in its time, and when it does, the farmer will be ready. The scythe maker has done his work. The blade has been forged and hardened and peened and attached to its handle. The tool exists, waiting for the hand that will wield it, waiting for the grass that will fall before it. Sleep comes easily in the village. The day's work brings its own reward, the deep, dreamless sleep of tired muscles and satisfied purpose. The scythe maker lies in his bed, his hands still bearing the ghost feeling of the hammer's weight, his ears still holding the memory of the peening rhythm. Ting, 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 ting. The sound fades. The rhythm slows. The breath deepens. The moon rises, casting silver light across the valley. It illuminates the uncut field, makes the grass glow pale and beautiful. It shines on the barn where the scythe leans, waiting. The blade catches a sliver of moonlight, reflects it back, a thin line of silver in the darkness. Tomorrow will bring its own work. There will be other scythes to make, other tools to repair, other customers with their needs and their coins. But tomorrow is not here yet. Now there is only the night, the quiet, the rest. The scythe is finished. The field is waiting. Everything is in its place. Everything is as it should be. The valley sleeps. The river flows. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. And in the barn, the scythe stands ready, its thin blade eager for the grass, its wooden handle smooth and comfortable, its balance perfect. When morning comes, when the dew is still on the grass and the air is cool, the miller's son will grip those handles. He will feel the weight settle into his hands. He will take his first swing, and the blade will whisper through the stems, and the harvest will begin. But that is tomorrow. Tonight there is only peace. The work is done. The tools are ready. The village is safe and the harvest will come. Rest now. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of sleep. Let your muscles relax into the comfort of your bed. Let your mind release the day's concerns and drift into the gentle darkness. The scythe leans against the barn. The blade is sharp. The handle is strong. Everything is ready. Everything is waiting. And you are safe. Sleep well. Sleep deep. Let the sound of the peening hammer fade into memory. Ting, 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 and silence, and sleep. You are safe.